The champagne glasses sparkled under the crystal chandeliers like 1,000 tiny stars. Margaret Chen moved carefully through the crowd, balancing her silver tray with the practice of someone who had done this 100 times before. Her black dress was simple, maybe a bit worn at the edges if you looked closely enough, but it was clean and pressed. She had made sure of that. At 62 years old, she knew how important it was to be invisible at events like these. This was the Riverside Charity Gala, the biggest social event of the season. Everyone who was anyone in the city had paid $5,000 just to walk through the door. Margaret had been called in last minute when one of the regular servers got sick. She needed the money. The rent was due in 3 days and her daughter's birthday was coming up. These kinds of events paid better than her usual catering jobs, even if they came with their own challenges. The ballroom was something out of a movie. Tall marble columns reached up to a ceiling painted with angels and clouds. The floor was so polished you could see your reflection in it. Round tables covered in white silk sat arranged around a stage where a grand piano waited, black and gleaming like a sleeping giant. Fresh flowers filled the air with a sweet smell that mixed with expensive perfumes and colognes. Margaret kept her eyes down as she worked. That was the trick to getting through these nights. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Smile politely if someone notices you, but don't expect them to notice you at all. To the people in this room, servers were like furniture that moved. Useful, but not really there. She had been doing this for almost 15 years now, ever since her husband died. Before that, she had worked at a small music school teaching piano to children. But that job didn't pay enough to cover the bills on her own. So she had started taking catering jobs on the side, then more catering jobs, until one day she realized she wasn't teaching anymore at all. Life had a way of pushing you in directions you never planned to go. A burst of loud laughter made her look up. A group of men stood near the bar, all wearing expensive suits that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. The one in the center was talking the loudest. Vincent Ashford. Even Margaret knew who he was. His face was on billboards all over the city, advertising his real estate company, Ashford Properties. He had inherited the business from his father and turned it into an empire. The newspaper said he was worth over $300 million. Vincent was tall, in his early 50s, with silver hair swept back from his face. He had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money, never having to wonder if you could afford groceries this week or next. He threw his head back when he laughed, making sure everyone could see he was having the best time in the room. Margaret moved past them, offering champagne. One man took a glass without looking at her. Another waved her away like she was a fly. Vincent didn't acknowledge her at all. She was used to it. The evening moved slowly. Margaret's feet started to ache in her shoes. She had worn her good pair, the ones that looked presentable, but they pinched her toes. She made trip after trip from the kitchen to the ballroom, carrying trays of champagne, clearing away empty glasses, always moving, always working. Around 8 o'clock, the event coordinator walked onto the stage. She was a thin woman in a red dress, holding a microphone and wearing a nervous smile. "Good evening, everyone," she said. "I'm afraid I have a small announcement. Our pianist for this evening has been delayed. There was an accident on the highway. He's fine, but he won't make it in time for our scheduled performance." A murmur went through the crowd. Some people seemed annoyed. They had paid good money for entertainment. The coordinator kept smiling, but Margaret could see the panic in her eyes. "We're working on finding a replacement, so please enjoy the refreshments and we'll begin our program shortly." Vincent Ashford's voice cut through the disappointed chatter. "Well, this is a fine mess. Here we have this beautiful piano and no one to play it." More laughter from his group. He loved an audience. Margaret was standing near a service door waiting for her next tray. She watched Vincent walk toward the stage, champagne in hand, looking around the room like he owned it. Which in a way he probably did. He had likely donated more money to this charity than anyone else here. "Someone must know how to play," Vincent announced to the room. "Come on now, don't be shy. We've got all this talent in one place and nobody wants to entertain us." His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for someone to put on the spot. That was his style. Margaret had seen men like him before. They thought everything was a game and everyone else was there to amuse them. Then his gaze landed on her. Margaret felt her stomach drop. She tried to look away to blend back into the wallpaper, but it was too late. Vincent was already pointing at her, a wide grin spreading across his face. "You there? he called out. Yes, you with the tray. Every head in the ballroom turned. Margaret wanted to disappear. Her supervisor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was across the room, and Margaret could see her eyes go wide with concern. Vincent walked closer, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. You look like you have some time on your hands. Why don't you go up there and give us a tune? You must know something. Mary had a little lamb, perhaps. The crowd tittered. Some people looked uncomfortable, but others were smiling, glad the attention wasn't on them. This was free entertainment, watching someone squirm. Margaret's face grew hot. She set her tray down on a nearby table, her hands shaking slightly. She had spent so many years being invisible, being dismissed, being treated like she didn't matter. This wasn't the first time someone had made fun of her, and it wouldn't be the last. But something about this moment felt different. Maybe it was the way Vincent stood there so confident, so sure that he was better than her. Maybe it was the tired ache in her feet from standing all night. Maybe it was thinking about her tiny apartment and her daughter who worked 2 jobs and her own reflection in the bathroom mirror that morning, looking older and more worn down than she felt inside. Come on now, Vincent continued, playing to the crowd. Surely someone of your position must have some hidden talents. Don't keep us waiting. Mrs. Rodriguez caught her eye and gave a tiny shake of her head. Don't do it. Don't cause trouble. Just apologize and get back to work. That was the smart thing to do. The safe thing. But Margaret was tired of being safe. She was tired of being invisible. And she was tired of men like Vincent Ashford thinking they knew everything about a person just by looking at them. She took a deep breath and heard her own voice, steadier than she expected, cut through the laughter and murmurs. Actually, sir, I do know a piece or two. The ballroom went quiet. Vincent's eyebrows shot up in surprise, then his grin got even wider. He thought this was getting better by the minute. A servant who thought she could play piano? This was comedy gold. Well then, he exclaimed, sweeping his arm toward the stage. By all means, let's hear it. Everyone, give our volunteer some encouragement. A few people clapped politely. Others whispered to each other behind their hands. Margaret could feel every eye in the room on her as she walked toward the stage, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. She had no idea what she was about to do. But after 30 years of silence, after 30 years of pretending to be someone she wasn't, maybe it was time to remember who she used to be. The walk to the stage felt like a mile. Margaret could hear her own footsteps on the marble floor, each one echoing in the sudden quiet. Her legs felt shaky, but she kept moving forward. She had said the words. There was no taking them back now. Vincent followed a few steps behind her, still grinning like this was the best joke he had heard all year. He turned to his friends and gave them an exaggerated wink. They were already pulling out their phones. Someone was going to record this, Margaret realized. Whatever happened next would be captured forever. As she climbed the 3 steps to the stage, Margaret caught sight of Mrs. Rodriguez near the kitchen door. Her supervisor had both hands pressed to her cheeks, looking like she was watching a car accident in slow motion. Margaret had worked for Mrs. Rodriguez for 5 years. She was a good boss, fair and kind, but she also had strict rules about staying professional, staying out of the way, never making a scene. Margaret was breaking every single one of those rules. The piano sat in the center of the stage, enormous and beautiful. Margaret had noticed it when she first arrived tonight. The way you notice something from your past that you try not to think about too much. It was a Steinway grand, probably worth more than her car and her apartment combined. The black surface was so polished she could see the lights reflected in it like pools of gold. She reached the piano bench and stopped. Her hands were sweating. Behind her she could hear Vincent addressing the crowd again, his voice full of theatrical warmth. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our surprise performer of the evening. More laughter rippled through the ballroom. I don't believe I caught your name, dear. Margaret turned slightly. It's Margaret. Margaret. What a lovely name. And how long have you been playing piano, Margaret? It was a trap, of course. However she answered, he would find a way to make fun of it. If she said she had never taken lessons, everyone would laugh at her nerve. If she said she had taken lessons, they would laugh at her pretension. Either way, Vincent won. A long time, Margaret said simply. How wonderful. Vincent beamed at the audience. Well, Margaret, the stage is yours. We're all eager to hear what you've prepared for us. He said the word prepared like it was a joke in itself, like she could have prepared anything. Like she was anything more than a woman who carried drinks for a living. Margaret sat down on the bench. The velvet cushion was soft, much nicer than the wooden stool she had at home. She looked at the keys, 88 of them stretching out in their familiar pattern, ivory white and ebony black. She had played her first scale on keys just like these when she was 5 years old. That felt like someone else's life now. Her mother had been a seamstress who worked 12-hour days to pay for those lessons. Margaret remembered her hands always red and sore from the needle, counting out bills for the music teacher each week. "You have a gift," her mother used to say in Mandarin. "Don't waste it," but life had other plans. Her mother got sick when Margaret was 22, right after she finished her degree. Someone had to take care of her to pay the medical bills. Then she met David, her husband, and he was kind and good, even if money was always tight. They had their daughter, and Margaret taught piano lessons in their living room while David worked construction. Then David got sick too, and the hospital bills piled up. And Margaret took the first job she could find that paid enough. One choice led to another, and suddenly 30 years had passed. "We're waiting," Vincent called out, snapping her back to the present. He was leaning against the side of the stage now, champagne glass in hand, looking completely relaxed. This was his world. He owned it. Margaret looked out at the crowd. Hundreds of faces stared back at her. Some looked curious. Some looked uncomfortable. Many looked amused, waiting for the show to start, waiting for her to embarrass herself so they could all feel better about their own lives. Near the back, she saw a young woman, maybe 25, in a server's uniform just like hers. The woman's eyes were wide with fear, probably terrified that she might be called up next. Margaret knew that look. She had felt that way for so long, afraid to be noticed, afraid to take up space, afraid to be anything more than what people expected. Something hardened inside her chest, a small, bright anger that had been sleeping for 3 decades. She turned back to the piano and let her hands rest on the keys. They were cool and smooth under her fingers. Familiar, like meeting an old friend you haven't seen in years. "I hope you're not planning to play chopsticks," Vincent said loudly, getting another laugh from his friends. "Though I suppose we should be grateful for small entertainments." That was when Margaret made her decision. Not the decision to play. She had already made that one when she walked up here. No, this was a different decision. She decided she wasn't going to play something simple. She wasn't going to play something safe that would let Vincent's joke slide by without consequence. She was going to play something that would make everyone in this room understand exactly who they had been laughing at. But first, she wanted them to feel the weight of their own cruelty just a little bit longer. Margaret lifted her hands from the keys and turned to face Vincent directly. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly through the silent ballroom. It was a voice she hadn't used in years, the one she had once used to speak to conductors and concert hall managers. "Mr. Ashford, do you know anything about music?" Vincent blinked. He hadn't expected her to ask him a question. For the first time since this whole thing started, his smile faltered just slightly. "I enjoy it, certainly," he said, recovering quickly. "I'm a patron of the arts, as you might know. I've donated quite generously to several orchestras." "That's very kind of you," Margaret said. "But I didn't ask if you gave money to music. I asked if you know anything about it." A few uncomfortable laughs scattered through the crowd. This wasn't going the way people expected. The entertainment was supposed to be watching Margaret fail, not watching her question Vincent Ashford. Vincent's smile got tighter. "I know what I like. Most people do," Margaret agreed. "But knowing what you like isn't the same as understanding something. Understanding takes time. It takes dedication. It takes sacrifice. And sometimes, Mr. Ashford, the people who understand things the most deeply are the ones you'd never expect." The room was completely silent now. Even Vincent's friends had stopped grinning. No one knew what was happening anymore. Was this still funny? Was this woman insulting one of the richest men in the city? Who did she think she was? Vincent's face had gone slightly red. He set his champagne glass down on the edge of the stage with a sharp click. "Well," he said, his voice cooler now, "why don't you enlighten us then? Show us what you've got." He meant it as a challenge, as a way to put her back in her place. "Play your little song, prove you're nothing special, and then get back to serving drinks where you belong." Margaret nodded slowly. She turned back to the piano, and this time when her hands touched the keys, something settled in her chest. A calmness she hadn't felt in years. She thought about her mother's red, sore hands. She thought about her husband holding her while she cried over giving up her music. She thought about her daughter, who worked so hard and never complained. She thought about every time someone had looked through her like she was glass, every time someone had assumed she was less than she was, and then Margaret pressed down on a single key, middle C. One pure, clear note that rang out through the ballroom like a bell announcing something important was about to begin. The sound hung in the air for a long moment. And then her hands began to move. The first notes came slowly, deliberately. Margaret's fingers moved across the keys like they were greeting old friends. She started with something simple, a gentle melody that floated through the ballroom like morning mist. It was beautiful but soft. Easy to dismiss if you wanted to. She could feel the crowd relaxing. See, their posture seemed to say, she can play a little tune. How nice, how quaint. Vincent shifted his weight against the stage, looking slightly bored now that the confrontation was over. He had probably expected her to fumble, to hit wrong notes, to give up in tears. This was almost disappointing for him. She was competent. Nothing more. But Margaret was just warming up. Her hands remembered things her mind had tried to forget. The weight of each key, the precise pressure needed for each note, the way your wrist had to stay loose, fluid, even when your fingers were flying, how your whole body had to become part of the music, not just your hands. She had chosen Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire, the kind of music that professionals spent months preparing for a single performance, the kind of music that separated people who played piano from people who were pianists. The opening was deceptive, gentle, almost melancholy. Margaret let it breathe, let the notes hang in the air. She was adapting the piece, playing the parts meant for a full orchestra on just the piano, but she knew how to make it work. She had done it before a lifetime ago. In the ballroom, people were still talking in low voices. A woman near the front whispered something to her companion. Someone's phone buzzed. They weren't really listening yet. Background music was background music after all, no matter who played it. Then Margaret's fingers began to move faster. The gentle melody started to build, adding layers, growing more complex. Her left hand thundered into the bass notes while her right hand danced up the higher keys. The sound began to fill the space, not just as background noise anymore, but as something that demanded attention. A man near the bar stopped mid-sentence. A woman turned toward the stage. The piece was building toward something. You could feel it in the air, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. Margaret's hands flew across the keys now, moving so fast they were almost a blur. The music grew louder, more passionate, more urgent. This wasn't a gentle tune anymore. This was sound that grabbed you by the chest and refused to let go. The cascade of notes poured out of the piano like water rushing over a cliff. Margaret's fingers found every key with absolute precision, even as the tempo increased. Difficult runs that most pianists had to slow down for, she played at full speed. Chord progressions that required stretching her hands painfully wide, she executed perfectly. She wasn't thinking anymore. Her conscious mind had stepped aside and let muscle memory take over. This was what 30 years of practice looked like. This was what happened when you started learning something at 5 years old and didn't stop until you were good enough to make grown men cry with your music. The conversations in the ballroom died. One by one, people stopped what they were doing and turned toward the stage. This wasn't what they had expected. This wasn't what they had paid for. But they couldn't look away. Margaret's body swayed with the music, leaning into the dramatic moments, pulling back during the softer passages. Her eyes were closed now. She wasn't in the ballroom anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere she used to live before life got in the way. She was 22 again, playing her senior recital at Juilliard. She was free. The music soared and crashed like ocean waves. Delicate melodies gave way to thundering crescendos. Her fingers attacked the keys during the aggressive passages, then caressed them gently during the tender moments. Every note was exactly where it needed to be, exactly when it needed to be there. Vincent had straightened up from his casual lean. His mouth was slightly open. The smirk was completely gone. He was staring at Margaret like he was seeing her for the first time, like she was a completely different person than the woman who had been serving him champagne 20 minutes ago. Because she was. Near the kitchen door, Mrs. Rodriguez had tears running down her face. She had worked with Margaret for 5 years and never knew, never asked, never wondered if there was more to this quiet woman who showed up on time and did her job without complaint. A woman in a silver dress near the front had pulled out her phone and was recording. Others were doing the same now. The moment had shifted from cruel entertainment to something else. Something rare. Something real. Margaret's hands pounded out a series of dramatic chords that seemed to shake the chandeliers. The piano wasn't just an instrument anymore. It was alive. It was singing, crying, laughing, screaming. Every human emotion poured out through those keys, and Margaret was the translator, the medium, the channel through which the music flowed. She had forgotten how good this felt. How right. When she was playing, she wasn't a widow struggling to pay rent. She wasn't a woman whose daughter worried about her. She wasn't tired or invisible or dismissed. She was powerful. She was important. She was exactly who she was supposed to be. The piece reached its most technically challenging section. This was the part where concert pianists sometimes made mistakes, where even the best players had to concentrate so hard that everything else disappeared. Margaret's fingers moved faster than seemed humanly possible. Notes tumbled over each other in a waterfall of sound. Her left hand played a rolling bass line while her right hand jumped octaves, stretching and reaching, never missing. Someone in the crowd gasped. A few people had moved closer to the stage without realizing it, drawn by the music like it was pulling them forward on invisible strings. Margaret opened her eyes for just a moment and saw them. Saw all of them really looking at her for the first time, not looking through her, not looking past her, actually seeing her. And in that moment, she understood something she had forgotten. She had made a choice 30 years ago to step away from music, to take care of the people she loved. That choice had been right. She didn't regret it. But that didn't mean this part of her had died. It had just been sleeping. The music built toward a climax. Margaret's entire body moved with it, her shoulders rising and falling, her head tilting back as she struck the keys with increasing force. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her fingers ached. She didn't care. This was what her body was made for. This was her purpose, written into her bones and blood and breath. The crescendo came like a tidal wave. Massive chords that used almost every key on the piano at once. Sound so big and powerful that it seemed impossible it was coming from just one instrument. The chandeliers actually did shake this time. Glasses on nearby tables vibrated. The air itself felt thick with music, and then, just as suddenly as it had built, the piece softened. Margaret's hands slowed. The dramatic passages gave way to something tender and heartbreaking. Quiet notes that fell like tears. A melody so beautiful and sad that it made your chest hurt. This was the part that separated good musicians from great ones. Anyone with enough practice could play the loud, fast sections. But to play something soft and make it matter, to make a quiet note carry as much weight as a thundering chord, that took something else. That took soul. Margaret played the ending like she was saying goodbye to someone she loved. Each note was a memory. Each chord was a piece of her heart, handed over to the audience. The music got softer and softer, like a light slowly dimming until finally, her hands lifted from the keys and there was silence. Complete and total silence. Margaret sat perfectly still on the bench, her hands hovering in the air above the piano. She was breathing hard. Her heart was pounding. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The ballroom was frozen, like time itself had stopped. Then someone started clapping. The first clap came from the back of the room, then another. Then suddenly the entire ballroom erupted. The sound was deafening. People weren't just clapping politely the way they did at charity events. They were on their feet, applauding like they had just witnessed something extraordinary, because they had. Margaret stood up from the piano bench slowly. Her legs felt weak, like she had just run a marathon. Her hands were trembling. She could feel her heart beating in her throat. For a moment, she just stood there on the stage, completely overwhelmed by the wall of sound coming at her. A woman in the front row was crying openly, not bothering to wipe away her tears. An older man was shaking his head in disbelief, still clapping. People were turning to each other with expressions of shock, mouthing words like, "Did you know?" and "Who is she?" Margaret's eyes found Vincent. He was standing exactly where she had left him at the side of the stage, but he looked like a completely different person. His face had gone pale. The confident smirk that had been his constant expression all night was gone, replaced by something that looked like shame. His hands hung at his sides. He wasn't clapping. For a long moment their eyes met. Margaret didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had been said through the music. She started to walk off the stage, her sensible shoes clicking on the polished wood. The applause continued, following her like a wave. People reached out as she passed, trying to touch her arm, trying to get her attention. She heard fragments of voices calling out, "That was incredible. Where did you train? Please wait, can I get your number?" But Margaret kept walking. She needed to get backstage, away from the lights and the noise and all those eyes. Her legs were shaking badly now. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was draining away, leaving her feeling hollow and exposed. She pushed through a side door into a dim hallway. The applause became muffled behind her. Margaret leaned against the wall, closing her eyes, trying to catch her breath. Her whole body was shaking. What had she just done? Margaret. She opened her eyes. Vincent was standing a few feet away. He must have followed her off the stage. Up close without his audience, he looked older, tired. The confident businessman was gone, and what remained was just a man who didn't know what to say. "I need to apologize," he started. Margaret held up her hand. "Please don't. But Mr. Ashford, I don't need your apology. I don't need anything from you." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I just need to go back to work." "Work?" Vincent looked confused. "You can't be serious. After what you just did, you're going back to serving drinks?" Margaret straightened up from the wall. "Yes, that's what I was hired to do. The pianist you were expecting will probably arrive soon, and then the evening can continue as planned." "Margaret, wait." Vincent stepped closer. "That performance. I've been to Carnegie Hall. I've heard the best pianists in the world. What you just played was at that level. Maybe beyond it. You shouldn't be here serving champagne. You should be on concert stages." "Should I?" Margaret's voice carried an edge now. "And who decides what people should be doing, Mr. Ashford? You? The people in that ballroom who couldn't be bothered to look at me until I proved I was worth their attention?" Vincent flinched. "That's not what I meant. Isn't it? You saw a woman in a server's uniform and you assumed you knew everything about her. You thought it would be funny to embarrass her in front of hundreds of people. You never considered that she might have a story, a history, a whole life that you knew nothing about." "You're right," Vincent said quietly. "You're absolutely right. There's no excuse for how I treated you, but please tell me who you are. How does someone with your talent end up? End up what? Poor, working service jobs? Is that what you can't understand?" Margaret shook her head. "Life doesn't always go the way you plan, Mr. Ashford. I went to Juilliard on scholarship, full ride. I was supposed to be a concert pianist. The instructor said I had rare talent. That was the phrase they used, rare talent." Vincent was staring at her. "Juilliard? When?" "I graduated 33 years ago. I was 22 years old and the whole world was in front of me. I had auditions lined up, a manager who was interested. Everything was falling into place." Margaret's voice grew softer. "And then my mother got cancer, stage 4. Someone had to take care of her, someone had to pay the medical bills. I was all she had." "I'm sorry," Vincent said. "She died 8 months later. By then I had missed my auditions. My manager had moved on to other clients. The momentum was gone. I met my husband that year, David. He worked in construction. He was kind and good, and we built a life together. We had a daughter. I taught piano lessons in our living room for years." Margaret's eyes were distant now, seeing the past. "Then David got sick too. Different kind of cancer, same result. The medical bills were crushing, even with insurance, even with everything we had saved. After he died, I took the first job I could find that paid enough to keep the lights on. Then another job, then another. And here I am." The hallway was quiet except for the muffled sounds of the party continuing in the ballroom. Someone had put on recorded music. The evening was moving forward without them. "You gave up everything," Vincent said. "I didn't give up anything," Margaret corrected him. "I made choices. I chose to take care of my mother. I chose to build a family. I chose to keep going after loss. Those weren't sacrifices, Mr. Ashford. They were my life. And I would make the same choices again. But the music is still there. It never left. I have a piano in my apartment, a small upright that I bought used 15 years ago. I play it sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. I don't need concert halls to make music matter. It matters to me, and that's enough. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller. I've never had to choose between things like that. Everything I have, I inherited. My father built the company. I just kept it running. I've never had to sacrifice anything important. Then you're lucky, Margaret said simply. Am I? I just humiliated someone in front of hundreds of people for entertainment. I judged someone based on their job and their clothes without knowing a single thing about who they actually were. That doesn't feel lucky. That feels like being an ignorant fool. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. His shame seemed genuine. Then learn from it. I want to help you, Vincent said suddenly. Let me make calls. I know people in the classical music world. I can get you auditions, opportunities. No, Margaret said firmly. But, Mr. Ashford, I appreciate what you think you're offering. But I don't need to be rescued. I'm 62 years old. My daughter is studying to be a nurse. My rent is paid. I have work that keeps me busy and helps me save a little money each month. I'm not unhappy. After what I just heard, you belong on stage. Maybe once I did, but that was a long time ago. Tonight was. Margaret paused, searching for the right words. Tonight was a reminder that the music is still in me, that I didn't lose it, that's enough. She pushed off from the wall and started walking toward the kitchen. Vincent followed. Please, he said. There has to be something I can do. Some way to make this right. Margaret stopped and turned back. You want to make it right? Then next time you see someone serving your drinks or cleaning your office or bagging your groceries, remember that you don't know their story. Remember that they might have talents and dreams and histories that would humble you. Remember that a person's worth has nothing to do with their job or their bank account. She paused at the kitchen door. And maybe use some of that $300 million to help people who are struggling. Really help them, not with a check, at a charity gala where you can put your name on a plaque, but in ways that matter, in ways that change lives. Then Margaret Chen walked back into the kitchen, back to her tray of champagne glasses, back to her life. Vincent stood alone in the hallway, his reflection staring back at him from a mirror on the wall. For the first time in a very long time, he didn't like what he saw. Margaret picked up her tray and took a deep breath. Her hands were still shaking slightly, but she steadied them. Mrs. Rodriguez was standing near the kitchen counter, her eyes red from crying. When she saw Margaret, she rushed over and grabbed her hands. I had no idea, Mrs. Rodriguez whispered. Margaret, all these years I never knew. It's okay, Margaret said gently. It wasn't something I talked about. But you could have been famous. You could have been. I was exactly where I needed to be, Margaret interrupted softly, taking care of the people I loved. There's no shame in that. Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed her hands. Take the rest of the night off, please, you've earned it. Margaret shook her head. I'd rather work if that's okay. I need normal right now. So she went back out into the ballroom with her tray, moving through the crowd like she always did. But everything was different now. People stopped her every few steps. They wanted to talk, to ask questions, to tell her how moved they were. An elderly man with kind eyes introduced himself as a retired music professor. I taught at Berkeley for 40 years, he said. That was one of the finest performances I've ever witnessed. A younger woman pressed her business card into Margaret's hand. I run a music festival. Please call me. Please, we would be honored to have you perform. Margaret accepted the card politely, thanked her, and kept moving. She wasn't sure what she would do with any of it. Part of her wanted to throw all the cards away and forget this night ever happened. But another part of her, a small quiet part, wondered what if. The evening wore on. The scheduled pianist finally arrived, full of apologies about the traffic. But when he heard what had happened, he asked if he could meet Margaret. They talked for a few minutes near the kitchen. He was young, maybe 30, and he looked at her with something like awe. I've been playing Rachmaninoff's Second for 5 years, he said. I still can't get through it without mistakes. What you did tonight, adapting it for solo piano and playing it that flawlessly, that's not just skill, that's artistry. Margaret didn't know what to say to that, so she just smiled and excused herself to refill her tray. She didn't see Vincent again that night. He had left the ballroom and she was grateful for it. She didn't need more conversation, more apologies, more people trying to fix her life or understand her choices. She just needed to finish her shift and go home. It was nearly midnight when the gala finally ended. Margaret changed out of her uniform in the staff room and pulled on her regular clothes, a simple pair of jeans and a sweater. Her feet ached. Her back was sore. But there was something else too. Something bright and warm in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. Mrs. Rodriguez insisted on paying her extra for the night. "You did more than serve drinks," she said firmly. "You gave everyone something to remember." Margaret took the bus home like she always did. The night was cool and quiet. Streetlights flickered past the windows. A few other tired people sat scattered throughout the bus, heading home from their own long shifts. Margaret wondered what their stories were, what dreams they had given up or held on to, what music lived inside them that the world never heard. Her apartment was small and dark when she let herself in. She flipped on the light and set her purse on the tiny kitchen table. For a moment she just stood there, unsure what to do with herself. The adrenaline was completely gone now, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. But she didn't go to bed. Instead, Margaret walked to the corner of her living room, where her old upright piano sat against the wall. It was scratched and worn, with keys that stuck sometimes and a sound that was never quite in perfect tune. She had bought it at a yard sale 15 years ago, paying with money she had saved from 3 months of extra shifts. She sat down on the wooden stool and opened the lid. The keys looked yellow in the lamplight. She touched them gently, playing a simple scale. The sound filled her small apartment, warm and familiar. Margaret began to play. Not Rachmaninoff this time, something simpler. A piece by Chopin, one of his nocturnes. It was beautiful and melancholy, the kind of music that sounded like moonlight felt. She played it slowly, savoring each note, not performing for anyone but herself. This was why she played. Not for applause or recognition, not to prove anything to anyone, but because the music needed to come out, the way breath needs to leave your lungs. It was part of her, as essential as her heartbeat. She didn't know how long she played. Time seemed to stop when she was at the piano. But eventually she heard a knock at her door. Margaret stopped playing and checked her watch. It was almost 1 a.m. Who would be knocking at this hour? She opened the door to find her daughter standing in the hallway. Lisa was 28, tall and strong like her father had been, with Margaret's dark eyes and determined chin. She was still wearing her scrubs from the hospital where she worked as a nurse's aide while studying for her nursing degree. "Mom," Lisa said, holding up her phone. "You're on the internet." Margaret's stomach dropped. "What?" Lisa came inside and pulled up a video on her phone. There was Margaret sitting at the grand piano in the ballroom. The video was shaky, filmed from someone's phone, but the sound was clear. You could hear every note she had played. Below the video were hundreds of comments. "Who is this woman?" This made me cry. "Absolutely beautiful. I was there tonight. She's a server at the event. No one knew she could play like this. This is what real talent looks like." The video had been viewed over 50,000 times, and it had only been posted a few hours ago. "Mom," Lisa said quietly, sitting down on the couch. "Why didn't you ever tell me you could play like that?" Margaret sat down beside her daughter. "It was a long time ago, sweetheart. It didn't seem important." "Not important?" "Mom, that was incredible. I had no idea. I knew you taught piano when I was little, but I thought you just knew the basics. I didn't know you were that good." "I was better once," Margaret said, "before life got in the way." Lisa shook her head. "No, you're still that good. Everyone can see it." She scrolled through more comments. "People are trying to find you. They want to know your story." "I don't have a story," Margaret said. "Not one anyone would care about." "Mom." Lisa put down her phone and took her mother's hands. "You gave up your dreams to take care of Grandma. Then you raised me while Dad was sick. Then you worked 3 jobs after he died to keep us afloat and help me get through school. That's a story. That's a story about sacrifice and strength and love. Don't you dare say it doesn't matter." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "I just did what needed to be done." "Exactly. And tonight you showed everyone that doing what needs to be done doesn't mean giving up who you are. The music was always in you, Mom. It never left." They sat together in the quiet apartment, mother and daughter holding hands. Outside, the city hummed with late-night traffic and distant sirens. Inside, everything was still. "What happens now?" Lisa asked. Margaret looked at her old piano in the corner. Then she looked at her daughter's face, so full of hope and pride. Then she thought about the feeling she had tonight when her hands touched those keys, and remembered what it was like to be fully herself. "I don't know," Margaret admitted, "but maybe I don't have to decide right now. Maybe I just keep going, keep working, keep playing, keep being exactly who I am." Lisa smiled. "I think that sounds perfect." 3 weeks later, Margaret received a phone call. It was from the Riverside Community Arts Center. They wanted to know if she would be interested in teaching piano to underprivileged children. The program was funded by an anonymous donor who had specifically requested that they reach out to her. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough that she could cut back on her catering shifts. Margaret said yes. She also started playing again. Really playing. Not on grand stages or in concert halls, but at the community center's small recitals. At local nursing homes where elderly people would sit and listen with tears in their eyes. At the children's hospital where Lisa worked, playing for kids who needed something beautiful to hold on to. Vincent kept his distance, but Margaret heard through Mrs. Rodriguez that he had set up a foundation for service workers returning to the arts. He was funding scholarships and grants, helping people who had given up their dreams to pay the bills. He never put his name on any of it. Margaret never became famous. Her videos circulated online for a while, then faded as new content took their place. But that was okay. Fame had never been the point. The point was the music. The point was remembering that who you are isn't defined by your job or your bank account or what other people think of you. The point was that it's never too late to come home to yourself. And every night when Margaret sat down at her old piano in her small apartment, she was exactly where she belonged.